Hello and welcome. I am Exit Light and this is my channel. Today we're going to talk about something that at least 90% of you have experienced. Yet, I don't think we've ever stopped to really think about it and how strange it really is. And there's a good chance that you've experienced it more than once. So let's get started on this. But before that, if you would please click the like button. That really helps my channel to be seen and recommended. And if you are not subscribed and you would like to be, please do so. And when you click the bell, it will notify you every time my content goes live. All right, let's talk about this strange thing that you've probably never even thought of before. Like I said, this is probably something that you've experienced multiple times in your life, and maybe you thought, oh, that's so weird, or it's so frustrating. But maybe you haven't added up how many times it's happened, or stopped to really consider what did happen. And here's what I'm talking about. Have you ever lost something that you had just a second before and you couldn't find it no matter where you looked? Have you ever had an object that was lost turn up in a place where it had no business being, or where you had looked 5 minutes before? Or maybe even stranger, have you ever had something that suddenly shows up that you have no memory of owning or purchasing? Oh, well, I do that, but that's after those 3 a.m. Amazon shopping hauls. So I have an excuse for that. But if you've been watching social media lately, there's a lot of talk about this, about people who buy something odd, unique, original, a hand-painted painting at the Goodwill, for instance, and they take it home and put it in the garage. 2 weeks later, they go in, they go to get it. They're going to hang it up or use it for like a Halloween decoration or something. And they see that they had one already, that they're identical, but they don't know how that's possible. And that's something that feels a little new that's happening. Like everybody in their lives has put something down, walked away, come back, and had it not be there, right? But having something extra be there, well, that is even stranger. So, though we typically write it off as just absent-mindedness or an odd sort of a, that's weird moment at best, we're not really thinking much of it. But is there perhaps something far stranger going on behind these annoying occurrences? There's an actual name for this type of phenomena, and it is called simply disappearing object phenomenon. That's original. Or DOP, which entails objects spontaneously vanishing, or maybe teleporting, or appearing out of nowhere. As I'm going to talk to you, we're going to talk about if perhaps these misplaced car keys that were just there a second ago have a stranger story to tell you than you might expect. And while we're talking about car keys, I want to talk about something that happened to me personally once, my husband. He took our car keys and he walked out our front door to our car and unlocked the car. Remember back in the day when you had to use a key to unlock your car? And when he got out of the car, he locked it. He had the keys in his hand. By the time he got into the house, he didn't have the keys. Now, this distance was probably no more, at best, than 25 feet, maximum. And somewhere between the car and the front door, the keys were gone. We looked everywhere. I mean, through every inch of grass in the yard. Even though he walked up the sidewalk, we still thought, well, maybe. Tore the car apart, but he had them in his hand when he locked the door, shut the door, and he used the key to lock it. So we knew logically that it wasn't in there. We even tore the house apart, knowing that when he had gotten in to put the keys where they belonged on the table by the door, he didn't have them in his hand. We eventually moved from that house a couple of years later, cleaned out the entire house, top to bottom. We never found those keys. How is that possible? That was the one time that it's happened to me that I thought, this is going down as one of the strangest things that's ever happened to me. And it did make me stop and think, what happened? Or have you ever, say, lost your phone, went to go to where you thought you had left your phone and it wasn't there, looked all over, takes you 20 minutes, you come back to the original place and your phone is sitting there, even though that's where you started the search? Yeah, you're starting to think about those times, right? And you write it off as, well, that was weird. Or, I must be losing it. Ages ago, long time ago, there was the show The Twilight Zone. Now, most of you know what I'm talking about. It was so long ago that it was in black and white. Somehow, I watched an episode, and they did this story where every minute our life stopped, and these elf-like beings came in and they had to put everything back together exactly the way it was. So that was their job. Every minute they go in and they recreate the entire scene of your living room, your bedroom, whatever the case may be. And sometimes one of them would forget to bring back your candle lighter, or your book, or your pencil. And then they'd have to recreate the scene again, and then they'd figure it out, and then go put that object back where it was supposed to be. And I always joke about that when you know that you put something down on the table or in your desk, you know it, you remember it, and it's not there. I always joke about the fact that the little gnomes need to come in and bring it back. And I actually have this, I don't know what it is, this thing I do where if I can't find something, before I get panic stricken, I just wait it out for a little while. and then I go back to where I thought I knew where it was, and oftentimes it is back there. So I have noticed it, but even at the level of that, where I'm like, just wait a little while, it'll be back. I never think, did it, teleport somewhere? What is the phenomenon that causes that to happen? I think it's interesting. That's why I want to talk about that today. The list of cases involving mysteriously disappearing or teleporting objects is vast. Well, I'm sure, because everybody has experienced this. And there are entire forums online dedicated to this subject. People putting down an item and then having it suddenly not be there anymore. Gone, no matter how hard they look for it, only for it to reappear in the exact same place they remember leaving it, or maybe even in a completely different place altogether. I have a friend who couldn't find her cell phone, looked all over her house, went to go make dinner eventually, turned her oven on, her phone was in the oven and it burnt. She hadn't been at the oven. Yep, there was her phone. We still tease her to this day about whenever somebody loses something, we always say, have you looked in your oven? And sometimes the object never appears again. It's gone. So here's one person's story about that experience. One afternoon, I was copying programs using my old Commodore 64 computer in a room designed as the, quote, computer room. Boy, that was a long time ago. The copy program had just instructed me to swap disks. There's probably people out there thinking, what is that? And I remember taking the original disk out of the drive and laying it on the desk next to the keyboard. At that time, my mother called me out of the room, and I went to see what she needed. By the way, when we first got our computer, we had a computer room too, because it wasn't a laptop or anything, and it was a designated room for the computer, and that suddenly made me think, wow, feels like forever ago. Upon returning a few minutes later, I noticed that it was time for another disk swap. The disk was not where I had left it. I looked everywhere. I took all of the disks out of the disk file. I looked under the desk, everywhere. I couldn't find it. I left the room and I came back, determined to retrace my steps. When I came back, the same result. Nothing. I left again, saying to myself that enough was enough. When I came back, my first impulse was to check the disk file again. I flipped down the first disk in the file, and there it was, backwards. At that instant, I felt an incredible feeling of dread, and I could swear that I heard a faint but amused laugh. So there was definitely a paranormal vibe to that one, with the particular detail of the amused laugh at the end. Plenty of other cases are out there as well, including this one I'm going to tell you about. 2 nights ago, my husband put his wedding ring on his nightstand before going to sleep. The next morning, the ring was missing. I helped him search the entire area without luck. I figured he misplaced it elsewhere, and I left for my evening shift at the hospital, figuring it would show up eventually. 2 hours later, I get a message from my freaked-out husband, who walked into the bedroom, and he found the ring sitting in the middle of the nightstand as if it had been there the whole time. We couldn't explain it. We had no visitors. We have no pets. He didn't leave during the period between my leaving and him finding it. He thinks it fell through a tiny wormhole time warp. But I'm looking for a more rational explanation, and I'm coming up empty. Or how about this next one, about a kitchen knife that just seemed to have phased out of their existence. In my case, it happened when the kitchen knife disappeared while I was preparing lunch. I've searched everywhere, all the logical places, trash cans, kitchen drawers, behind things, also unlikely places like under furniture, outside the house, and places that no one would have remembered. The fact is, even though I thought of and searched everywhere, the knife was nowhere to be found. A few days after the event, I still couldn't wrap my brain around the strange disappearing knife act. There seems to be no logical explanation as to what happened. If it had simply melted away from her reality. A ring or a knife might be a small item that could be easily misplaced, but what about a whole dress? I'm going to tell you about this story. It was the night of my freshman homecoming. I had bought 3 dresses a few days before, but was planning on wearing a simple black and white one. Nothing fancy. I went to my closet an hour or so before the dance to get ready, and the dress wasn't in my closet. Nowhere in my closet. Not even with the other 2 dresses I had bought. My mom and I searched everywhere, but still couldn't find it. My mom finally said that I had to wear one of the others, and so I chose one of the white ones. A day or so after the dance, I went to my closet to find a shirt, and the black and white dress I was going to wear to the dance was the first piece of clothing on the rack. Go figure. These sort of cases involve a wide range of effects, covering not only objects disappearing or reappearing, but also of them showing up in a far-flung location, or even objects that the owner adamantly claims they do not own, spontaneously blinking into existence. It was these kinds of experiences that led researcher Hereward Carrington to look further into experiences of mysteriously displaced objects, and he believed that the phenomenon went beyond simply absent-mindedness. Among the many cases he was able to compile was one in which a woman known only as Mrs. K had the habit of always leaving her keys on a table as soon as she entered her apartment. One day, she did this as usual, but when she went back to retrieve the keys, she found them to be gone, and she could not find them, no matter what or where she looked, leading her to have all of her keys remade. Several days later, she found herself needing a new cork for a medicine bottle. These corks were kept in a tin box that she almost never opened, and hadn't needed to open for a long time. Yet when she went to retrieve the new cork, she found her missing keys nestled in the tin. Another case involves a Los Angeles artist named Raymond Bayless. He claimed that he had been holding a brush while speaking to a student in 1957. He was in a room that had nothing in it except for a stool and an easel. On a sunny day, with no carpet on the floor, at some point, both Raymond and his student heard the brush fall to the floor as if it had dropped. Yet the brush was not there when they went to retrieve it, nor was it anywhere to be found in the vicinity. Considering there was nowhere where it could have possibly gone, and the room was bright, it was as if it had dropped completely off the face of the earth. Years later, a researcher of anomalous events named Dr. Scott Rogo took an interest in the phenomenon of disappearing objects, and he endeavored to become the very first person to comprehensively collect cases of what he called spontaneous dematerialization. Rogo would go on to collect a vast array of reports on the phenomenon, and he published several articles on the matter in Fate magazine. There are a wide range of theories on just what is going on with the disappearing object phenomenon. They range from the rational to the more fringe. Perhaps the most sensible and mundane explanation is simply absent-mindedness or forgetfulness. Many of us have a lot on our minds, And especially when engaging in routine, mundane activities, our bodies can sort of go into autopilot without us really being fully aware or completely focused on what we're doing. I mean, we do that when we're driving too, right? Sometimes I'm driving somewhere and I accidentally go to somewhere that I go all the time. My body's just like, we're going to the grocery store instead of we're heading to the mall, you know. In that sort of a tranced state, we might put something down somewhere without even realizing it, and then when we snap back into our focus and remember, say, our car keys, we might remember holding them a minute before, but not the point when we put them down in our days. Or maybe we get distracted. Maybe the phone rings, so we put an object down without thinking. Although I can't imagine ever opening my oven and then when I'm done with my phone call, putting the phone in there, but only to return from the call and remember having the object, which is now nowhere to be found. This can be particularly baffling if it is something you usually always put in the same place, or something you do not typically let far out of your sight. That simple explanation likely accounts for the majority of these cases, but doesn't completely account for some of the more inexplicable disappearance cases, such as when someone finds an object and it is not where one put it. They actively search and then find it back in the original place that they had thoroughly looked for before, or in a room they hadn't even gone into. Or maybe the mundane explanation is someone picked up your keys and used them for some reason. They didn't tell you. So possibly they put them somewhere else. Maybe if you ask them, they deny it because they think they're going to get in trouble. Or maybe they forgot themselves that they had borrowed it or lost it. Who knows? This theory could account for some of these cases as well. But still, that's not applicable if one is alone. So what about some stranger and more bizarre theories? One far out idea is that the objects have somehow shifted to another dimension or a plane of existence, either temporarily or permanently. In this scenario, the lost object has phased away into a parallel world that is somehow interacting with our own in ways and through means that we don't currently understand. And this theory would also explain and account for something that shows up in your home that you don't remember owning or buying. It's just suddenly there. Suddenly you have two of these paintings, these hand-done paintings that you picked up. One you picked up at the Goodwill, and now you have another one, you don't know where it came from. Somebody in another dimension is trying to find their creepy Halloween decoration painting. Maybe even you in that other dimension trying to find that painting. Another strange idea is that maybe there are poltergeists that could be behind this. These mischievous spirits are known for all manner of weird happenings, such as levitating objects, unexplained noises, music, smells, movements of objects to other places, so it would fit well in with some of these experiences of disappearing objects. This could especially be the case if the item in question has a strong attachment somehow to someone who has passed away, an old family heirloom, perhaps, meaning that the spirit could still be anchored or attached to it somehow and able to have physical influence over it, or that the owner's physical belief that the spirit is present is somehow so strong that it is manifesting to telekinetic abilities. But the most interesting fact or feature of these odd cases is that they don't tend to make a particularly big impact when they do occur. In most cases, people tend to file that away and forget the event, no matter how strange or unexplainable it may have been at the time, meaning that a great many cases that have happened have maybe not even be told because the person just thinks, okay, that was weird. So maybe there's a lot more useful information out there than we have now because people haven't been recognizing it as something very unusual rather than just something mundane that happens sometimes. So what I'd like to ask you is, can you tell me one of your stories? Can you put this below? I am wanting to do a podcast with Rob on this subject. And as most people have had these stories, I'm sure that you guys have them. So if you would, please tell me your stories about something that you put somewhere and you know you did it, and then it was gone. Maybe you never found it again, or maybe you did 5 minutes, an hour, a week later, the exact same place. Please tell me those stories. Tell me what you think. What happens to these objects when you put them down? What happened to my car keys in the 25 feet from my car to my front door? So please leave your stories below. Thank you for coming, and good night.